So the next step, now that we know how we segment the market, and now that we decide which target to serve, we want to position our product in a way that consumers will understand what it stands for. So basically, positioning is the place the product occupies in consumer minds. So if I say Volvo, you say safety. I said Budweiser, you say sports. So the idea is to increase or enhance one or two attributes of the product. So when consumers hear the brand name, they will understand what the brand stands for. Now, during the buying process, consumers categorize products and position them in their mind in order to compare with competition in the evaluation stage. So that will be stage 3 that we learned about. How do we do that? So there's actually a research tool that marketers use, which is called Perceptual Positioning Map. This tool is used usually in exploratory research and can be used in focus groups or in interviews. And the idea is that we ask consumers to basically place our brand in compare to the competition on a few attributes that we think are important to us. So let's look at an example where the two attributes will be price and quality. So for example, these are just brands. We don't even know what they stand for. We have our brand, which is right here. And then we have the competition. We have brand A, B, C, D, and E. And we have quality, which obviously this will be high and this will be low. And then we have price, which this will be low and this will be high, because basically we want to make sure that our price is lower than competition. So here, based on the perceptual map, we can see that we are the same as brand B when it comes to quality, but we are actually better on price compared to brand B. So based on this perceptual map, our brand has a competitive advantage over brand B. On the other hand, brand C is actually cheaper than my brand, but it's also lower quality. So then the question is, will my target market be willing to compromise on quality if it means that they're paying a lower price? And the same you can see here. So this one, the quality is much lower, but the price is much lower. And here the price is high, and actually the quality is less than mine. So definitely my brand is better than D and E. So this is basically how companies decide where to position themselves compared to competition and what kind of features they want to offer to their target market in order to gain competitive advantage. So choosing a differentiation and a positioning strategy will be based on a few criteria. One is identifying a set of possible competitive advantage. So for example, in our case, we talked quality and we talked price. So obviously a lower price will be an advantage or a higher quality, but also maybe higher quality for a higher price, depending on what is the value that our target market think is the best. We also want to choose the right competitive advantage. So is it really worth reducing the price if it means that we also will reduce the quality? And then we have to select what we call an overall positioning strategy. So if I have lower quality but also lower price, am I positioning myself maybe as Walmart, which might not sell you the most recent electronic products, but you can get 6 months old electronic products that are still very competitive on the price. So communicating then that positioning to the market is key, because the market, the consumers need to understand what is your positioning compared to competition and how are you different than competition. So identifying a set of possible competitive advantages to build a position is very important. So one way, of course, to differentiate yourself is to show that your product is different. Now, that is easier said than done, because a lot of times you cannot actually offer to consumers something that's really different when it comes to the product. Sometimes you can, like Head & Shoulders, for example, were the first shampoo that was able to treat dandruff. So that was a product feature. However, what happens if you can't differentiate based on product? there are still other ways to differentiate your company. So one will be service. For example, same-day delivery or free returns. Now, one of the things that Amazon did in the retail world, the disruption that they did, was that although they're an online company, in many big cities, they offer you same-day delivery. By doing so, they actually took the advantage that a retail store had, where you come, you buy, and you pick it up. And now I can also buy on Amazon cheaper, exactly same brand, same product, and I still get it the same day. Then we also have channel differentiation. So channel differentiation, for example, will be in distribution. So again, it can be online versus a retailer. Only here we're not talking price, but we might be talking availability. I might go to a Nike store that's a retail store. They might not have the size of the shoe I want. However, when I go online, I will get the size that I want if that size exists in the market, because the online retail store covers many more SKUs than the retail store. Another way of differentiation is what we call through people. So, for example, the service that you get by the service givers. So Disney, the parks, are known as the happiest place on earth. So the people who work in Disney indeed needs to be very happy all the time. But they are. So when I think about Six Flags versus Disney, the competitive advantage of Disney is that sort of legend, sort of fictional world where everything is great and everything is happy. That's not what you get when you go to Six Flags. The barista, the Starbucks, one of the reasons originally Starbucks gave the baristas some equity in the firm was so the baristas will treat their customers in a way that they will feel this is a community coffee place. This is no longer happening, but that is how Starbucks differentiated themselves in the beginning, in addition to also offering high-quality coffee. And then finally, we have image differentiation, which also sometimes we'll call branding. And this is one of the main reasons why companies like to build a brand. So if I ask you what's the difference between Nike and Adidas and Puma, you might not really know, but you can tell me what they stand for. And a lot of times you will buy Nike because of what it stands for, that you can do it, and that everybody is an athlete, maybe as compared to Adidas that are known to be more for athletes, maybe soccer kind of sports. And the same will be with cars, with BMW versus Mercedes-Benz, and so forth. So then one of the things you want to ask yourself, again going back to the SWOT analysis and going back to the environmental scanning, what can your company do better than competition? And basically, what is your competitive advantage? So we can do what we call repositioning. Repositioning is when the positioning that I currently have might not be the best. Part of it could be because I just made a mistake when I originally marketed the product, but part of it, which usually is the case, is because the market changed and consumer changed, and my product or my positioning no longer fit the consumers. So repositioning is basically trying to get a brand that's not doing so well but used to do well, and trying to recreate the differentiation in order for consumers to understand why this brand is worth purchasing. So for example, Old Spice, a few years ago, did repositioning. Old Spice used to target by demographics. They used to target relatively old, affluent men. However, as those men got older, the market became younger, and Old Spice started to be a brand that you only buy for your grandparents or your grandfather in this case. So they wanted to reposition it as a young man product. Hence, they brought a super football sports figure, and they changed the whole position that Old Spice is now for actually young, attractive men, and they were very successful. Bell Atlantic at the time was known to have very bad service, which they could afford when they were a monopolist. But then when they went into the cell companies' phone, they became Verizon. because it's actually sometimes easier to create a new brand than to try to reposition an old one. So in their case, they decided to give up the brand name Bell Atlantic, which on the perceptual map was not having any advantage, and create a new brand and just create a new positioning altogether. So the challenge then is to change perception of a brand that's forged many, many years through advertising. Some brands are more successful than others in doing that. So finally, I want to show you a map or a diagram that talks about possible value propositions. And here, the idea is, again, we're looking at benefits and we're looking at price. And the idea is, compared to competition, what can you afford? Where the blue ones are supposed to be what we call a winning proposition. So this is actually where we want to be. So if we take the first one, the more for more, that means that I offer something that's more expensive, but also has better quality. So consumers understand that they have to pay more because they're actually getting more. So like BMW, Mercedes-Benz, what we call luxury products, use the more for more. Of course, the challenge is to convince consumers that they are actually getting more for their price. The other challenge is that some consumers might be convinced but will not have the budget to actually buy our products. The next strategy is more for the same. More for the same means that I'm giving them more quality, but actually at a lower price. So Lexus at the time was an attempt to have more for the same, because they offered a car that was relatively higher quality than the regular cars, but yet they charged not as much as the BMW and the Mercedes. So it's a luxury car, but with a lower price. Then the next strategy is more for less. More for less is when I have better quality with lower prices. So that will be Target, that will be Trader Joe, maybe even Amazon in some cases, especially now these days when they're actually selling some of the brand names. And then we have the same for less. So that will be Geico and that will be Walmart, where you have the same products but for a lower price. So they don't offer better quality, they offer the same quality for lower price, and Amazon is also in that market as well. And then finally, you have the less quality for lower prices, which will be the Motel 6. It will be the Kmart. So it will be maybe fast food restaurants, where you do get not as high as quality, but you don't expect to get high quality. And on the other hand, you pay much less than the others. So what you want to see is that all of these 5 strategies are actually good for the company, but they have to fit with what the company perception is, what their positioning is, and what is the actual product that they can deliver to the consumer.